13. Chosen ones. You look younger than your age. They thought you were easy. The truth doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it kicks the door completely off its hinges, dragging everything hidden into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. And the most dangerous, terrifying truth to a highly insecure, deeply performative person is encountering someone who possesses the exact, authentic power they have spent their entire lives pretending to have. Most people out there do not actually hate intelligence, grace, or genuine spiritual power. No, what they truly despise is what your intelligence and your grace make them feel about their own manufactured, exhausting, and meticulously curated existence. Chosen ones, you know exactly what this feels like. You have been walking through environments, workplaces, social circles, and even family dynamics where you are observed with a strange, intoxicating mixture of fascination and underlying venomous resentment. You carry a frequency that profoundly confuses the heavily guarded, deeply cynical people around you. You have been placed in rooms and situations that felt incredibly heavy, toxic, and suffocating, yet you have managed to maintain a lightness that deeply, viscerally triggers the insecure spirits existing in your orbit. Today we are dissecting a very specific, fascinating, and undeniable psychological dynamic. We are talking about the fact that you carry an energetic and physical youthfulness that completely short-circuits the people who try to test you. You look younger than your chronological age. Your spirit feels infinitely brighter than the traumas you have survived. And because of this undeniable, radiant glow, they made the absolute fatal miscalculation of thinking you were easy. They looked at your light and arrogantly assumed it was naivety. They looked at your unburdened aura and falsely assumed you hadn't been through the fire. They tried to play a sinister game with you, only to realize far too late that they had stepped into the arena with a spiritual heavyweight whose boundaries are forged in iron. Let us break down exactly why your youthful energy exposes their bitterness, why they completely misjudged your capacity for warfare, and why they utterly unraveled when you finally showed them the razor-sharp steel hidden right behind your gentle smile. Let's get into it. Before we dive completely into the deep end of this psychological breakdown, I need you to subscribe, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share the video with someone who needs the reminder. Number 1. They fundamentally mistook your unburdened physical radiance for a complete lack of brutal life experience. When these highly insecure, profoundly performative individuals first encountered you, they performed a rapid, highly superficial assessment based entirely on your external energy. They looked at your smooth skin, your clear eyes, and the effortless lightness with which you carry yourself, and they arrogantly categorized you as an easy target. In their distorted, deeply cynical worldview, the only valid evidence of having survived the brutal trenches of life is carrying the visible, ugly, rotting scars of bitterness. Because they themselves are exhausted by the relentless performance of their own lives, they equate the physical signs of rapid aging, chronic stress, and heavy energy with intelligence and worldliness. Therefore, when they saw your absolute lack of spiritual and physical fatigue, their predatory instincts kicked in. They assumed that you had never faced real adversity, that you had been shielded from the agonizing darkness of the world, and that your youthful kindness was simply the byproduct of a sheltered existence. The contrast here is monumental. They are constantly contrasting their own borrowed, defensive, externally validated facade against your authentic, hard-earned internal alignment. They completely fail to realize that your lightness is not a lack of gravity, but the absolute, masterful conquest of it. They behave this way because they are fundamentally lazy, emotional predators. They are desperately searching for a host they can drain without facing any resistance. Their psychology is driven by a terrifying fear of engaging with anyone who might challenge their fragile superiority complex. So they actively hunt for people they perceive as blank slates. It is exactly like watching someone confidently walk into a lion's den because they arrogantly mistook the sleeping king of the jungle for a harmless house cat. Your peace is absolutely not the peace of the naive. It is the profound peace of the veteran who has survived the war and alchemized massive trauma into untouchable wisdom. From the outside, their arrogant approach looks entirely goofy. It is a deeply tragic display of overconfidence from a person who has absolutely no idea that they have just stepped into a spiritual weight class they are completely unqualified for. They see the gentle smile, but not the agonizing internal battles. They see the vibrant youth, but not the centuries of grueling spiritual evolution it took to maintain it. They thought you were fresh meat, and they found out you were the apex predator of truth. Number 2, your cellular preservation forces them to directly confront the accelerated physical decay caused by their own malice. Toxicity is not just a fleeting psychological state. It is a heavy biological anchor that ages people at a terrifying speed. Holding on to deep grudges, constantly plotting against others, chronically nursing jealousy, and perpetually scanning the room for external validation, literally rots the bones. It dries up the human spirit and etches permanent, heavy lines of misery into a person's physical appearance. They look in the mirror every single morning and see the heavy, exhausted, unavoidable toll that their own malice has taken on them. Then they look at you. You look years, sometimes a full decade or more, younger than your actual chronological age. Your eyes are incredibly clear, your energy is buoyant, and you move through the heavy world with a lightness that they simply cannot comprehend. This stark contrast is deeply, viscerally offensive to their fragile ego. You are walking around as an authentic, overflowing, crystal-clear, fresh spring well, while they are standing nearby as a shallow pool of stagnant, mosquito-infested water. Psychologically, they behave with such intense, frantic mimicry and passive aggression because they are actively mourning the permanent loss of their own light. They cannot buy what you have. No amount of cosmetic alteration, expensive clothing, or performative spiritual talk can replicate the unmistakable glow of a soul that is resting in divine alignment. Because they absolutely refuse to do the grueling, internal shadow work required to heal their own decay, their only remaining defense mechanism is to attempt to drain your vitality. They desperately want to stress you out. They want to see you age. They want to inject chaos into your peaceful ecosystem so that you will finally look as tired, haggard, and burdened as they constantly feel on the inside. When you entirely refuse to take the bait, their behavior becomes increasingly frantic and unhinged. They start aggressively performing their exhaustion, complaining loudly, and attempting to guilt-trip you for your unwavering peace. You sit there, completely unbothered, while they completely exhaust themselves, trying to convince you that your light is a flaw. It is a spectacular, humiliating failure of manipulation, and it leaves them looking empty, hollow, and utterly defeated by a script you completely refuse to follow. Number 3, they calculated that your gentle, youthful demeanor was a fawning trauma response, entirely failing to realize it was a sovereign luxury. People who operate from a low vibrational state view kindness strictly as a currency of the weak. In their dark, cynical world, you are only kind because you entirely lack the leverage, the intelligence, or the courage to be cruel. They saw you smiling, speaking softly, and accommodating minor inconveniences, and their predatory instincts immediately flared. They assumed your kindness was fawning. They thought you were absolutely terrified of conflict. They mistook your peaceful, unbothered demeanor for a flimsy paper shield. But what they entirely disastrously failed to comprehend is the profound contrast between your empathy, which is born from absolute, unshakable internal power, and their compliance, which is born entirely from fear and the desperate need for external validation. You are not kind because you are afraid of them. You are kind because you are not intimidated by them in the slightest. You are operating like a perfectly tailored velvet glove, completely concealing a devastating iron fist. The deep psychology of the imitator or the hater in this scenario is rooted in a desperate, insatiable need for dominance to mask their own terrifying insecurities. Their ego is so incredibly fragile that they have to constantly, obsessively scan their environment for someone they perceive as weaker, just so they can assert a false, pathetic sense of superiority. They rely entirely on a predictable script where they bark and you immediately cower. When they finally push too far, stepping over a boundary they arrogantly thought you did not have, and you suddenly drop the velvet glove, the shock to their nervous system is catastrophic. They fully expected an easy victim, and instead, they violently woke a sleeping lion. You deliver a boundary with such terrifying, clinical calmness, such absolute lack of chaotic emotional reactivity, that it shatters their entire psychological framework. They look absolutely ridiculous in the aftermath, scrambling to recover their composure, suddenly stuttering, sweating, and aggressively backpedaling. They thought they were dominating a naive, inexperienced child, only to realize they just walked entirely unarmed into the heavily guarded territory of a seasoned warrior who simply prefers the beautiful aesthetics of peace. Number 4, your literal refusal to age under pressure violently invalidates their deeply held belief that suffering must leave an ugly, visible scar. Insecure people who have endured hardship often make the fatal tragic mistake of building their entire personality around the fact that they survived. They wear their trauma, their bitterness, and their ruthlessness as heavy armor, entirely convincing themselves that being cruel, suspicious, and cold is the only possible way to navigate a dangerous, unforgiving world. When they look at you, they see someone who has walked through the exact same fires, perhaps fires that were 10 times hotter and significantly more destructive. Yet you emerged without the ugly, hardened burn marks they display so proudly. You are soft. You are open. You look remarkably young and entirely unburdened. This threatens them on an existential, foundational level. The contrast is profound and undeniable. You represent the beautiful, intentional, incredibly difficult act of genuinely healing the wound, while they represent the tragic, lazy choice of wearing the bleeding, infected wound as their entire identity. It is the exact difference between a stunningly restored vase, repaired with brilliant gold through the ancient art of kintsugi, and someone who is just walking around carrying broken, jagged shards of glass, aggressively demanding that everyone in the room praise them for holding on to the pieces. Psychologically, your healed, vibrant state forces them to directly confront a terrifying reality. Their bitterness was a choice, They did not have to become toxic to survive. They did not have to lose their innocence, their kindness, or their youthful spirit. Seeing you thriving and looking so incredibly vibrant proves that their dark, cutthroat approach to life is entirely unnecessary. This realization shatters their fragile ego into a million pieces. Because they cannot rewind time and choose healing, their only recourse is to desperately try to break you. They want to see you crack. They will actively attempt to push you into situations that would normally trigger a massive trauma response, just to see if they can make you act as ugly as they do. When you handle their hostility with effortless grace, totally refusing to let their poison change your internal chemistry, they look completely unhinged. They are frantically trying to prove that the world is a dark place, and your shining existence is the ultimate, undeniable proof that they are wrong. They see the calm, but not the absolute resilience. They see the youth, but not the excruciating inner work required to preserve it. Number 5. They tried to aggressively project their heavy, bitter baggage onto you, completely assuming your lightness meant you had no energetic boundaries. Misery does not just love company. Misery aggressively demands an audience, a co-signer, and a willing host. Toxic, deeply insecure individuals walk around carrying massive, overflowing buckets of resentment, anger, and unhealed trauma. When they spotted your light, your innocence, and your unbothered youthful energy, they immediately viewed you as a blank canvas. They genuinely, arrogantly believed that because you looked agreeable and soft, you would be incredibly easy to infect. They thought they could casually, effortlessly dump their petty gossip, their cynical worldview, and their heavy emotional baggage onto you, slowly dimming your light until you looked exactly as exhausted as they do. But here is the massive, uncompromising contrast between you and them. You have a highly fortified, internal architecture, while they are walking around with Velcro misery. Everything sticks to them. Every slight, every minor inconvenience, every perceived insult. Nothing sticks to you, because your energetic architecture is entirely fortified by divine, unshakable alignment. Psychologically, they desperately need you to be bitter, because your corruption validates their own refusal to heal. If someone as bright and seemingly easy as you can be corrupted, it proves to their fragile ego that the world is inherently dark and that their toxicity is entirely justified. But trying to project their bitterness onto you is exactly like throwing wet mud at a perfectly cut, brilliantly shining diamond. The mud makes a mess for a fraction of a second, but it cannot penetrate the impenetrable surface, and eventually it just slides right off, leaving the diamond entirely unscathed and leaving them standing there with filthy, disgusting hands. You quietly watch them do this. You watch them try to bait you into negative, low-vibrational conversations, try to make you jealous, try to make you doubt yourself, and it is a wildly frantic, deeply tragic display of emotional immaturity. They are expending massive amounts of caloric and spiritual energy trying to drag you down, while you are expending absolutely zero energy remaining exactly where you are. They completely exhaust themselves against your unyielding peace, looking increasingly foolish as their projections bounce right back into their own tired, aging faces. Number 6. They tragically mistook your strategic, quiet observation for the naive ignorance of an inexperienced child. The loudest person in the room is almost always the absolute weakest. People who operate from a place of deep insecurity and performative arrogance absolutely cannot tolerate silence. Silence forces them to listen to the empty, terrifying echo of their own hollow souls. because they constantly overtalk to aggressively control the narrative. They assume that anyone who is quiet is simply lacking the intelligence, the life experience, or the courage to speak. They looked at your youthful face, noticed you quietly sitting back, and immediately concluded that you were oblivious. They thought you did not see the subtle, insidious manipulation. They thought you missed the passive-aggressive tone. They fully believed you were totally blind to the underlying power dynamics. In reality, your silence was intensely, surgically strategic. You were gathering critical data. The contrast here is staggering. They are completely addicted to empty chatter and immediate external gratification, while you operate with the lethal precision of internal alignment and strategic silence. They are playing a high-stakes game of poker, while loudly, obnoxiously screaming every single card in their hand, while you are sitting calmly, cards held tightly to your chest, watching their eyes, tracking their tells, and knowing exactly how the game ends before it even begins. Psychologically, their intense need to assume you are ignorant stems from their absolute terror of being truly seen. If they admit that you are highly perceptive, they must also admit that their meticulously crafted mask is totally transparent to you. This is exactly why they act so incredibly goofy when they try to pull a fast one on you. They will confidently spin a massive, complicated web of lies or half-truths, fully expecting you to nod along like a naive, unworldly child. When you finally respond with a single, highly calibrated, surgical question that instantly dismantles their entire narrative, the sheer panic in their eyes is palpable. They realize in that exact, horrifying moment that you saw them coming from a mile away. They thought you were easy prey, but you were actually the absolute apex predator of truth, quietly letting them walk themselves directly into their own trap, while you barely even blinked. Number 7. Your self-sustaining, youthful energy deeply offends their desperate need for external battery packs and chaotic drama. Let us get straight to the absolute core of narcissistic and highly insecure dynamics. They are emotional and energetic parasites. They do not possess the internal mechanics to generate their own self-worth, their own joy, or their own peace. They rely exclusively on the reactions, praises, fears, and validations of other people to feel alive. They must constantly siphon energy from their environment just to maintain their miserable baseline existence. Then they look at you. They see someone who is entirely self-sustaining. They see that your happiness absolutely does not depend on their approval. Your peace is not contingent on their erratic behavior. Your youthfulness and vitality bubble up from a profound wellspring deep inside your own sovereign spirit. The contrast is as absolute as comparing a state-of-the-art, off-the-grid, solar-powered home to a crumbling, condemned house that only keeps the lights on by aggressively running stolen extension cords into the neighbor's windows. Psychologically, their intense hatred of your self-sufficiency is driven by a profound, terrifying loss of control. If they cannot control your energy supply, they cannot control you. They cannot threaten to take away their approval because you never asked for it in the first place. They cannot withdraw their presence as a punishment because your presence is entirely enough for you. This renders their entire arsenal of manipulation completely useless. This is exactly why they behave in such a frantic, erratic manner around you. They will try to give you backhanded compliments, try to minimize your achievements, or try to ice you out socially, eagerly waiting for you to crumble and beg for their validation. But you do not flinch. You do not chase them. You simply continue to shine, powered by your own divine connection. It is profoundly tragic to watch them constantly changing their tactics, adjusting their fake masks and running out of breath, while you sit there completely unbothered, your internal reactor humming flawlessly. They see the unbothered radiance but entirely miss the impenetrable internal architecture that sustains it, completely immune to their desperate need for relevance. Number 8. They assumed your open heart was an unlocked door, completely unaware of the heavy spiritual artillery guarding your peace. Because you carry a youthful lightness and an incredibly empathetic spirit, toxic individuals make the fatal error of confusing your accessibility with a complete lack of security. They look at your willingness to see the good in people, your quickness to smile, and your ability to forgive, and they think they have found the ultimate easy mark. They genuinely believe that because you are soft-spoken or kind, you do not have the capacity or the backbone to defend yourself. In their minds, you are a beautiful house with the front door left wide open, just waiting to be robbed. The contrast here is the profound difference between a genuinely fortified kingdom that actively chooses to lower its drawbridge out of grace, and a defenseless, chaotic village that has no walls at all. They are entirely performative, aggressively posturing to look tough, because they have no actual internal defenses. You, however, are deeply anchored in spiritual authority. Your heart is open because you are absolutely confident in your ability to protect it. Psychologically, their desire to exploit your openness is driven by their own profound cowardice and fear of stagnation. They only attack people they believe cannot fight back. They are terrified of a fair fight, so they desperately seek out what they perceive as weakness. Metaphorically, they are like a foolish trespasser stepping onto a tranquil estate, arrogant and entirely unaware that there are highly trained spiritual snipers hidden in the tree line, tracking their every single move. When they finally attempt to cross the line, when they try to disrespect you, manipulate your kindness, or steal your energy, you do not panic. You simply raise the drawbridge. You enforce a boundary with such swift, uncompromising, and terrifying precision that it leaves them completely reeling. The shock of realizing that your open heart is guarded by impenetrable divine armor completely shatters their delusion of control. They thought you were easy to exploit, but they end up absolutely humiliated, staring at the massive, immovable walls of your self-respect, realizing they were never even close to breaching your actual perimeter. Number 9. They eagerly anticipated your physical and mental collapse under their pressure, and your effortless grace entirely short-circuited their reality. There is a deeply sinister, pathological satisfaction that insecure, competitive people get from watching someone else fail. When they realized they could not casually control you, could not drain your energy, and could not easily break your boundaries, they resorted to applying direct, heavy pressure. They started vicious rumors. They set you up for failure. They aggressively withheld resources, or they created impossible scenarios designed specifically to make you snap. Because you look so remarkably young, because your energy is so vibrant and seemingly gentle, they thought you would shatter like fragile glass the absolute moment the hammer dropped. They grabbed their popcorn and eagerly waited for the meltdown. They fully expected tears, begging, or a complete loss of emotional control, but they vastly underestimated your profound internal architecture. The contrast here is between raw, unyielding grace under fire and the pathetic, entirely predictable reality of crumbling under the pressure of an external audience. You are pure, solid gold, being refined in the blazing furnace, while they are cheap, mass-produced plastic, melting into a highly toxic puddle at room temperature. Psychologically, their intense desire to see you fail is a desperate attempt to rewrite the hierarchy of their own fragile ego. They feel so far beneath you in spirit, so they try to orchestrate a scenario where you fall beneath them in reality. When the immense pressure hits you, and you absolutely do not fold, when you simply pivot, adapt, and handle the adversity with a quiet, lethal competence, their entire world tilts on its axis. Your grace absolutely terrifies them. It proves that your youthful appearance is not a sign of fragility, but a sign of supreme spiritual optimization. You do not waste precious energy panicking. You do not waste energy complaining. You simply solve the problem and keep moving forward. Watching their faces when you successfully navigate the traps they set for you is almost comedic. They look bewildered, frantic, and entirely defeated. They stacked the deck, rigged the game, and paid off the dealer, and you still effortlessly won the hand because you are playing a completely different game governed by entirely different spiritual laws. Number 10. Your absolute refusal to age in bitterness completely denies them the pathological satisfaction of believing they ruined you. Toxic, manipulative people have a deep, sick, psychological need to leave a lasting, ugly mark on their victims. If they cannot keep you in their life to actively control you, they desperately want to know that they damaged you so badly that you will never be the same. They desperately want to be the villain in your story. They want to know that years from now, you are still sitting in a therapist's chair, crying over what they did to you. Your face hardened by the stress, your eyes dulled by the intense pain. They want you to look exactly as old, tired, and defeated as they constantly feel inside. But you absolutely refused to give them that satisfaction. You walked away. You did the heavy, brutal, internal healing, and you bounced back, looking even better, even younger, and even more incredibly vibrant than before. The contrast is breathtaking. You are moving forward lightly, leaving the heavy baggage exactly where they dropped it, while their borrowed insecure persona is still dragging around the massive chains of their own guilt, shame, and malice. It is the metaphor of a rushing, crystal-clear river instantly washing away dirty footprints on the bank, versus someone who spends their entire life meticulously etching their petty grievances onto a heavy granite tombstone. Psychologically, when they stalk your social media, or when they hear about you through the grapevine, and they see that you are glowing, smiling, and effortlessly thriving, it completely destroys their fragile ego. Their ultimate fear is total irrelevance. By entirely refusing to let their toxicity edge you, by entirely refusing to carry their bitterness in your biological vehicle, you make them completely irrelevant. You render their impact entirely void. They expected to break you permanently, but all they did was provide the necessary friction for you to perfectly polish your diamond. This makes their current behavior incredibly tragic. They are obsessing over a person who does not even think about them. They are frantically trying to figure out how you survived their absolute worst, while you are simply enjoying your beautiful life, looking 10 years younger, completely unbothered by the ghost of their influence. Number 11. They fatally mistook your profound capacity to forgive and release as naive amnesia, assuming you were easily fooled. Because you are a chosen one, because you operate on a much higher frequency of divine alignment, you understand the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of forgiveness. You know that holding on to resentment is exactly like swallowing rat poison and waiting for the other person to die. So, you forgave them. You released the spiritual debt. You entirely cleared the ledger so that your own heart could remain light. Youthful, and completely unburdened by the radioactive waste of their actions. But people who are steeped in toxic performance and deep insecurity absolutely cannot comprehend this level of spiritual maturity. When you did not seek aggressive revenge, when you did not try to destroy their reputation, and when you continued to treat them with unbothered grace, they arrogantly assumed you had completely forgotten what they did. They mistook your high-level forgiveness for low-level weakness. They mistook your lack of retaliation for a complete lack of awareness. They genuinely thought you were just a sweet, gullible, easy target who could be abused on a continuous loop. The stark contrast here is the profound difference between forgiving someone to entirely free your own internal architecture versus completely forgetting the lesson to appease their external performance. It is exactly like a powerful, sovereign king pardoning a petty thief and permanently banishing the sea from the kingdom, versus a naive fool pardoning a thief and then cheerfully leaving the vault door wide open. Psychologically, their complete inability to understand true forgiveness stems from their own deeply punitive, retaliatory nature. In their dark world, if you have power over someone who wronged you, you crush them. Because you did not crush them, they assume you possess no power. So, they arrogantly try to cross the line again. They reach out, they push a boundary, they try to run the exact same manipulation play that worked in the past. And that is exactly when you politely, firmly, and entirely shut them down. The absolute shock on their face is incredible. You look at them with those clear, youthful eyes, and you let them know without a hint of anger that you remember exactly who they are, exactly what they did, and that they will absolutely never have access to you again. Their frantic backpedaling is a spectacularly goofy thing to witness. They thought they had outsmarted you, only to realize you had simply outgrown them entirely. Number 12. Your existence is a haunting, biological mirror, reflecting the pure innocence they deliberately murdered within themselves for cheap power. This specific point strikes at the absolute darkest core of the imitator and the hater's psychology. Every single person is born with a measure of light, innocence, and divine connection. But as life progresses, people are faced with critical choices. Many of the highly performative individuals who are secretly competing with you looked at the heavy demands of a corrupt, superficial world and actively decided to sell out. They traded their authentic internal alignment for perceived status. They traded their kindness for a perceived competitive edge. They actively murdered their own innocence, intentionally hardening their hearts because they genuinely believed that being ruthless, cynical, and manipulative was the only possible way to climb the ladder of success. They thought they made the smart, realistic choice. Then, they look at you. You are walking, living proof that they made the entirely wrong choice. You beautifully preserved your authenticity, you fiercely protected your inner child, and you meticulously maintained your absolute integrity. And yet, here you are, succeeding, thriving, looking remarkably vibrant, and operating with a massive level of spiritual authority. The contrast is entirely devastating to their entire worldview. It is the profound difference between carefully preserving a priceless, solid gold family heirloom through generations of care versus smashing the heirloom to pieces just to buy a mass-produced, gaudy knockoff that everyone else in the neighborhood already has. Psychologically, their intense hatred for your youthful spirit is pure, unadulterated grief, perfectly masked as rage. Looking at you forces them to look at the ghost of exactly who they could have been if they had only been brave enough to stay soft in a hard world. Their immense spiritual bankruptcy becomes glaringly obvious in your radiant presence. They are frantic to find a flaw in you, because if you are truly as authentic and untainted as you appear, it means their entire life philosophy is a tragic, irreversible failure. They act out. They try to find dirt on you. They try to poke holes in your character, acting like desperate, sweating detectives, searching for a crime that was never committed. It is deeply pathetic, because no matter how hard they look, they only find more of the light that they permanently extinguished in themselves. Number 13. They entirely failed to factor in the uncompromising, divine spiritual protection that actively preserves your youth and ricochets their malice. When an insecure person operates strictly in the physical realm, driven entirely by ego, status, and performative manipulation, they become entirely blind to the massive spiritual architecture governing reality. They looked at your physical form, your youthful face, your gentle posture, your quiet demeanor, and they evaluated you purely as a physical opponent. They calculated your visible resources, your social standing, and your agreeable nature, and arrogantly decided you were an easy mark. They entirely failed to look behind you. They entirely failed to sense the overwhelming, absolute divine backing that fiercely guards your life and preserves your youthfulness. The contrast is astronomical. It is the profound difference between walking into battle with an impenetrable, divine shield of absolute favor versus walking into battle entirely naked, armed with nothing but unprotected scheming and cheap parlor tricks. It is the perfect metaphor of an arrogant fool aggressively throwing tiny pebbles at what they think is a thin pane of glass, entirely unaware that the glass is heavily reinforced, spiritually bulletproof, and explicitly designed to ricochet the projectile directly back at the thrower's face. Psychologically, their performative arrogance is their ultimate undoing. They truly believe they are the smartest person in the room. They believe their little whispers, their hidden sabotage, and their passive-aggressive maneuvers are entirely undetectable masterpieces of strategy. But the universe does not just see their actions. It actively intercepts them on your behalf. Every single time they dig a pit for you to fall into, you effortlessly walk around it, and they end up falling in themselves. Every time they try to ruin your reputation, the lie gets violently exposed, and their own credibility is destroyed. They absolutely cannot figure out why they keep losing to someone who doesn't even appear to be fighting back. Your lack of anxiety, your youthful glow, and your unbothered peace are the direct results of knowing you do not have to fight battles that belong to the divine. Watching them entirely exhaust themselves, growing older, more tired, and more bitter with every failed attack, while you just continue to bloom and thrive, is the ultimate display of spiritual justice. They thought you were alone and undefended, and they found out the incredibly hard way that you are fiercely, divinely protected. Number 14. Your vibrant, ageless spirit is the undeniable living proof that you successfully broke the heavy generational curses they are still furiously defending. We must understand that many of the people who project the most vitriol and mimicry toward you are often people from your own bloodline, your hometown, or your longest-standing social circles. These are individuals who have entirely normalized dysfunction. They have normalized the heavy, aging, crushing weight of generational trauma, poverty mindsets, and chronic, performative misery. They view this heavy burden as an inescapable inheritance, a script they are biologically forced to read from. But you absolutely refused to carry it. You did the grueling, solitary, subterranean shadow work. You sat in the absolute darkness. You confronted the demons of your lineage, and you broke the heavy chains. Because you broke the chains, your spirit became incredibly light. Your body physically responded to the profound release of that generational stress. You literally look younger, brighter, and healthier because you are no longer metabolizing the ancestral trauma that is actively killing them. The absolute contrast here is staggering. It is the exact difference between a prisoner who quietly found the key, unlocked the cell, and walked out into the bright, warm sunshine, versus a group of prisoners who are still sitting inside the exact same unlocked cell, furiously polishing the bars, fiercely defending the prison guards, and screaming at you for having the audacity to leave. Psychologically, your profound freedom is their ultimate trigger. If you could heal, if you could drop the massive burden, if you could reverse the spiritual aging process and step into profound internal alignment, it means that their continued suffering is largely a choice. They hate you because your unbothered, youthful existence violently removes their excuses. They desperately want you to come back to the cell. They want to pull you back into the heavy, dramatic, aging dysfunction they comfortably call normal. They will actively try to guilt-trip you, calling you arrogant or claiming you changed. But their frantic attempts to reel you back in look completely ridiculous from your new vantage point. You are standing in the sun, breathing fresh air, watching them throw absolute tantrums behind bars they could easily push open. You force them to realize that their entire reality is a self-imposed prison. They see the glorious freedom, but not the agonizing escape. They see the boundless future, but not the absolute courage it took to walk away. When you zoom out and deeply look at the absolute totality of this psychological and spiritual dynamic, the intense projection, the frantic mimicry, the desperate attempts to trigger you, and the sheer exhausting performance of the people who arrogantly thought you were an easy target, one massive, undeniable truth becomes impossible to ignore. Their issue was never actually about your physical actions. It was never truly about what you said, what you wore, or how you lived your day-to-day life. The ultimate target was always your energy, your light, and your absolute, unwavering internal alignment. They desperately wanted access to your internal architecture. They aggressively wanted to breach the walls of your peace, inject their chaos, and steal the youthful, vibrant, divine frequency that you worked so incredibly hard to cultivate. They falsely thought you were easy because they only measured power by the pathetic, superficial standards of a broken, ego-driven, highly performative world. They entirely, catastrophically missed the silent, devastating, unstoppable power of true divine alignment. Chosen ones, let this be your final, incredibly uplifting and empowering reminder today. You absolutely do not have to prove a single thing to these miserable people. You do not need to lower your vibration to explain your reality to those who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. You absolutely do not need to perform your strength, seek any validation, or plot any kind of petty revenge. The ultimate closure, the most devastating response you can offer to those who doubted you and tried to exploit you, is to simply continue to exist in your highest vibration. Keep healing. Keep protecting your peace. Keep maintaining your rigorous spiritual hygiene. And never let the heavy, stagnant bitterness of an unhealed world convince you to age your beautiful, eternal spirit Let them choke on their assumptions while you effortlessly step into the reality they can only pretend to live. Just keep growing and being unapologetically authentic. Subscribe, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share the video with someone who needs the reminder. Stay chosen, stay blessed.